delighted to be joined today by not one, but two guests to discuss new relationships in a divorced family. Ambar Bharwani is a solicitor at Expatriate Law in Singapore. She focuses on supporting British expats and their spouses globally in divorce and financial proceedings within the English courts. She has extensive experience in cases involving the international movement of children. Helen Biscoe Taylor is both a qualified and registered adult psychotherapist and a family, child, couples, and adolescent psychotherapist. She's been in private practice for over 20 years and spent 7 years working in the parenting team. She has a keen interest in preventing mental health problems where possible. Amber and Helen will each be answering my questions from their own professional perspective and sharing advice on how to handle the introduction of a new member in a family circle. And of course, I will give my 2 cents from a divorce coach's point of view. It's easy to forget that divorce continues to impact family dynamics for years after it's actually finalized. There's many different changes that affect the equilibrium that people reach after divorce, and it's almost inevitable for one of the 2 former spouses to meet someone new. Things get particularly complicated when there are children involved. And the change in circumstances will, of course, directly impact the children and maybe even reopen old wounds for the other parent. Today, we're going to discuss how to manage the impact of new romantic relationships on both the children and the parents. So let's adopt a chronological approach and start with scenarios of involvement of a new romantic partner before the marriage is over. Amber, could you please talk us through the relevance of infidelity as part of the divorce proceedings?
Sure. So in English divorce proceedings, infidelity or even adultery can be relevant factors, but it's important to note that the legal landscape prioritizes a no-fault divorce approach. The grounds for divorce is no longer applicable. This means that the court doesn't typically consider the reasons behind the breakdown of the marriage when deciding financial matters. In English and Welsh divorce law, there's a no blame, and this is based on either party during the divorce proceedings, and that is no longer required to give a reason for your divorce in your divorce application to the court. When someone believes their marriage has ended as a result of infidelity, they may feel that as an injured party, they should receive a more generous financial settlement. And traditionally, people believe that the unfaithful party will be treated more harshly in court, but this is a myth and no longer true. In nearly all cases, the judges won't try to blame or penalise either party, except in very rare circumstances. However, there are situations where infidelity might directly influence the proceedings. For example, if one party's behaviour of infidelity has financial implications, such as dissipation of assets on extramarital affairs, the court may take this into consideration and account when determining a fair financial settlement. But the emotional impact of the infidelity can sometimes affect other aspects of the divorce, such as the child custody arrangements or the demeanour of the parties during negotiations. But in the majority of situations, the advice would need to be tailored around the client's specific situation, as the relevance of infidelity can be based on the unique circumstances of each case.
Yeah, I think the beauty of no-fault divorce is that it takes away that finger pointing and blaming, really. But for the spouse that feels like they've been morally wronged, it can be hard as well. I was looking at some statistics back to 2021 before the no-fault divorce was introduced in the UK. And actually, interestingly, only about 8% of divorces were requested on the grounds of infidelity, even though research shows that 1 in 5 marriages experiences infidelity at some point. So many people do work through it. Another thing I read recently, which I thought was very interesting, is that one of the most common non-standard prenup clauses that people choose to add in is for a fine to be paid if there's infidelity. So clearly people are trying to seek some other sort of justice in case of infidelity, even if the legal system doesn't acknowledge that. Helen, from your perspective, really, how would you typically support someone who's struggling with the lack of emotional justice that the law, doesn't provide?
Yeah, it's difficult because it's like Amber was saying that the demeanor of a person can be changed because they're so hurt by the infidelity, and that it's something that you kind of stay with. It's a space for people to come and say how hurt they are, and also that to lower their expectation that the courts are going to sort out the moral injustice.
Yes.
And it's hard, it's painful, it's not something that you can take away from somebody, it's something that has to be worked through. And also, like you were saying, Chloe, it can have long-term implications, because if the person that the spouse has been unfaithful with is going to stay around, then the pain carries on into Christmas fairs, carol services, other people talking about them. It's very difficult.
Yeah, I can imagine. And so what do you recommend people say to the children about the infidelity, and how long should they wait to introduce the new person if that relationship continues?
Well, I think it's really difficult. It depends how old the children are. It depends if the relationship is serious, whether the spouse who is with someone else believes it's a relationship that's going to continue. Because if it's not a relationship that they think is going to continue, it's not a good idea for the children to meet them.
Yeah.
If it is something where they are committed to the person, ideally you would allow the parents to separate out and the children to get used to that, and then introduce the other person slowly, as opposed to them being there and the children moving. But all sorts of things happen.
Yeah, I guess you would want to avoid the child making an association between that new person and the parents' divorce, right?
Yeah, I mean, depending on the age. So for young children, they'll be very accepting, but for older children, many of them will wonder. Yeah. And they may well ask. And I think if they ask, you want to tell them the truth. You want to try and tell them the truth, again, with no fault, but that's often very difficult.
Especially if it's being said by one of the parents who is obviously emotionally involved.
Yeah. And I think that's where the idea of a wicked step-parent comes from.
In all the fairy tales. Yeah. So I'd like to focus on relationships post-divorce now, because it also brings its own load of complex situations. And many people are, of course, very worried about the impact on children and how it will impact the time they spend with the parent who's in a new relationship. Will they get as much attention? How involved is a new person going to be in raising the child? What if the child doesn't accept or like them? So Amber, picking up on that scenario of the child rejecting the new partner, from a legal standpoint, what can a parent do if a child refuses to visit the parent who's in a new relationship because they don't want to be around their new partner?
So if the child is refusing to go to contact, then the starting point would be quite simply to speak to the other parent and explain the difficulties. Engage in a family expert if you consider this to be beneficial. Identify support you could draw on to assist you both in managing the new parenting dynamic. Explore alternative options to court proceedings. Court proceedings is always a last resort. So continuing to encourage the child to, with positive reinforcement to do the best to promote the other parent in a positive light, despite the parent's feelings towards him or her. Because there is an expectation as a parent to do the best to facilitate contact, and making a court application isn't necessarily going to help the situation. If anything, you should be working with the other parent to identify what is going wrong and how things can be made easier for the child. Because from a legal standpoint, they focus on parental responsibility, with the paramount consideration being the best interest of the child. So there's a presumption in law that contact and spending time with both parents will be beneficial to the child, whilst the court will take into account the child's wishes and feelings depending on their age and understanding. And applying the welfare checklist, it's reluctant to allow the child's preference to be decisive. the long-term benefits of having a relationship with both parents in most cases will outweigh any short-term distress caused by seeing that parent. Parents often must encourage their children to do things they don't want to do. And of course, nobody's suggesting that a child should be dragged kicking and screaming to visit the other parent. So it's vital to just get to the bottom of the issues, and maybe this might be changing the different venue or the times, and what is not acceptable in the court's view is to simply say, okay, no, you don't have to go anymore to the child. If the child is saying, oh, I don't want to go, simply just saying that, the court isn't going to look at that in a positive light. They will see that as parental alienation on top of the child's view. So yeah, parents are encouraged to work together. But yeah, there might be situations where the court will have to intervene, and they will assess the situation based on the child's age, the wishes and feelings, the reason behind the refusal, and a child arrangements order may need to be made by the court to determine the time spent with each child.
Yeah, but of course it does make sense for the parents to try and sort it out directly, to speak to the child, and to just communicate and try and fix the issue in the most constructive way. And Helen, is there anything you would recommend from a psychotherapist position in terms of how the parents can handle the situation?
Yeah, because it is unusual for a child not to want to see the other parent. They may not want to see the girlfriend or the boyfriend. So it is to try and find out really what's going on. There's often a huge amount of anxiety in both parents, but particularly if a parent feels betrayed and they're alone and they're shocked, then they have a need of their children, or they find it really difficult to let their children go. Some can be very anxious that the other parent is going to be good enough. They have concerns or they have concerns about the other person, that they're going to harm them, and the child picks it up. So it is really, if possible, to speak to both parents, to find out what's happening, to try and allay anxieties if they're there, to make it possible for every member of the family. Because if it's possible for every member of the family, normally the child will do well. And that if they've met the boyfriend, girlfriend too quickly, then maybe, you pull back from that and they reestablish the relationship with the other parent, because they themselves can be fearful that they prefer the new boyfriend, girlfriend, that they don't love them, that they don't care about them. And so it is that there's often a huge pot of anxiety, and it's how to look after that and alleviate it, so everyone is a bit freer to move. If parents can be adaptive, because often you find very hard edges in the beginning about how much time they want to spend with their children, and it's not always in the child's best interest, especially if they're very young. They often want to spend more time with their mother and spend more nights with their mum, and whether that can be accommodated. And to remember that where you start is not where you end up, that whatever you arrange in the first thing, it's going to keep being fluid.
And it needs to be. I think that flexibility is very important for the children, because you don't know how it's going to go and how the children are going to react until you actually start implementing it. So that's a good segue, actually, because I did want to explore the impact on the former spouse, especially if the relationship is continuing from a pre-divorce infidelity. It's not uncommon for the remaining parent to be tempted to reject this new boyfriend or girlfriend as well, or even to be worried about being overshadowed, in their own parenting role. So Amber, if one parent gets remarried or starts living with a new person, does the other parent have a say as to the time the child spends with a new partner? Can they do anything to prevent them from, being left alone in their care, for example?
The short answer is generally no. But both parents have the right to form a new relationship. So unless there is a court order in place that expressly prohibits the ex from exposing the child to any new romantic partners, which quite frankly is very rare, then there may be little that they can do. But when one parent remarries, the other parent generally doesn't have an automatic right to dictate the time the children spend alone with the new partner. If there is a doubt, a court order can certainly assess the situation from the vantage point of what's in the child's best interest. But with that said, the situation might be different if the parent has expressly agreed to not expose the children to a new partner, or to do it gradually, and that agreement has been breached. And again, if there's a genuine concern about the welfare of the child spending time with the new partner, they may attempt to address these concerns through communication with the other parent, just being open, honest, and that would likely lead to a mutually acceptable arrangement. But if an arrangement or an agreement can't be reached, then yes, seeking advice from a mediator is the first go-to, or another legal professional. And in extreme cases where there are genuine and significant concerns about the safety and well-being of the child around the new partner, then yes, other legal avenues should be explored, which would involve either applying to the court for a specific issue order or a prohibited steps order. And then the court will assess the situations and make decisions based on that.
But it needs to be more than just, I don't like that person, I guess.
Yeah, unfortunately. Emotions have to be put to the side when it comes to the children.
And Helen, how would you help the parent who's feeling like they're being replaced by the new step parent, that you feel threatened?
Yeah, to reassure them that that just doesn't happen. To trust their children, that they love them, that they're important. And actually, it's wonderful if they can love the other step parent, because can be a great resource. But it's sometimes hard in the beginning to be that pragmatic. And that I really encourage people to meet their new partner away from with their previous spouse, to go have a coffee, go for a walk, to really try to be the grown up, to leave the space for the children to actually build good relationships. And I think that there's a lot of reassurance that needs to be there, that however, because sometimes that with the other partner they're having these amazing glamorous lives and going on incredible holidays and having amazing opportunities, and you have to keep reassuring that you might do the mundane, boring things every day, but you will be valued and loved for it, and that that all will be well.
And I guess if you look at it as a positive, there's another parental figure who is there to care and love for your child. So it's about shifting that way you look at it as well.
Yeah, and it's hard in the beginning, but
sure.
to really encourage to see that it can be advantageous.
So before we wrap up, I wanted to zoom in on a slightly more extreme scenario. Unfortunately, as we all know, it does happen that one parent's rejection of the other's new partner leads to some sort of parental alienation. So Amber, is there anything that can be done from a legal standpoint if one parent is blocking access to the other parent because they just don't like the new partner?
So if that is the case, some potential avenues are initially seeking mediation is often recommended. And then mediators can assist in facilitating communication and reaching an agreement that is in the best interest of the child. Whereas if mediation is unsuccessful, which is unfortunately very common in these situations, a parent can apply to the court for a child arrangements order. This order would then outline the time spent with each parent and the court's paramount consideration as to the welfare of the child, as they may potentially be alienating. Again, the parent that is being alienated can also apply for the specific issue order or the prohibited steps order. So the specific issue order is that there is a specific matter in dispute, and the prohibited steps order is there a specific action the other parent is taking that needs to be prohibited. In cases where there is already a court order in place, one parent and the other parent is not complying with it, then they can make an application to enforce that order. So seeking the court's insistence and ensuring that the terms of the order are followed.
Yeah.
But it's important for the person who's denied access to document these instances and maintain open communication where possible, because this evidence would be helpful to enclose within their potential court applications or foreseeable statements that may need to be filed. So that would be my top tip in there if that was to happen.
Can a child actually be legally required to go visit the other parent even if they're rejecting them?
Yeah, so I actually had a case probably 2 years ago where the end result, after a lot of legal and court action was taken, where the child actually ended up living with the other parent permanently, which was the parent that he initially hated. But after a lot of court involvement and a lot of support and assistance from the social services, for example, that the tables essentially turned.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. And from a therapist standpoint, Helen, how would you support the child in particular if they're alienated from their other parent?
Yeah, again, it's really difficult. I think it's like Amber's saying, because that it's always going to be a group action, that I wouldn't be able to do it on my own. And again, it really depends on the age of the child. But I think very often the alienation starts actually in the marriage. It doesn't always have to do with another partner coming along at all. It's like there's a difficulty. And so it's begun even before the parents have separated out. And that it's often very noticeable because the child isn't using language that you would expect a child to use. And so I pick up on that in therapy. I'd be trying to find out what it is the child wants. And normally you're going to be involved with the school. Just like Amber says, I think for the parent that's being alienated, it's really important to stay in good connection to the school, to document everything, to ask the school sometimes to make a referral to early help, so to get social services involved really early on, to try to do it. Because like Amber, I've worked with a family where 2 of the children were taken away from the mother. But even though that's happened, the difficulty still persists for the children. And really trying to encourage the parents to think about the needs of the children. And for some parents, they've completely lost sight of it. And to really try to help them see this is what, at this stage of development, this is what your child needs. And again, that I often think there's a huge amount of anxiety behind the person who's alienating the child, and how to look after them and make sure they have the right therapeutic support so that the child can be free.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. I think there's an interesting question there about whether a child can be made to then change their mind if they've been, manipulated and told terrible things.
Well, all the evidence is the minute that you take them away from the alienating parent, where it's really, really severe, literally within the minute that they're told, okay, you're not going to be with mum anymore, you're going to be with dad, they're absolutely fine, totally fine.
Interesting.
It's like being told that today, like the sky is bright blue and the sun is shining. It's like they know it's not. But they have to agree to it. But the minute you take them away, they can go, no, it's grey and it's raining.
Oh, that's brilliant. Well, that gives hope to all of those who are in that situation then. Well, thank you both. This is really helpful to understand. I mean, for me as a divorce coach, I'd always say that the golden rule of any conflict, but especially within divorce, is to just try to be the best version of yourself. And I know that's easier said than done, but really stick to your values. Make sure that what you're doing is aligned to who you are and who you want to be. What I usually tell people, especially parents who are struggling with the introduction of a new figure, is to challenge their own behavior and ask themselves, do I hate my ex and their new lover more than I love my children? because that's really the heart of the matter here. You know, are you being ruled by your own anger and resentment, or are you really prioritizing your children's long-term well-being? Thank you, Helen and Amber, for joining me today. It was an incredibly interesting conversation, so I really appreciate your insights, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.